Welcome to the Irish NFL Show and welcome to our Week 6 Talking Points brought to you by Buskers on the Ball in Dublin's Temple Bar. You can check out Buskers on the Ball on Sunday evenings where they show a selection of live games and also Red Zone every NFL weekend. Well, in weekend 6 just gone, or 5 even, the Ravens again demonstrated the wisdom of spending the whole week in London if you want to return home with a win. The Niners and Eagles both lost their undefeated records. The Jets, Bengals and Raiders evened up their records. And our beloved Giants, Broncos, and Bears all lost again. Let's start with the Niners and Eagles going down, though, Colin. Have Sunday's losses changed our view, or should they change our view of either of those two teams? Maybe let's start off with the Niners, because I guess one of the particular talking points from that game, from their perspective, is the loss of Christian McCaffrey. Instant impact on the way they were able to run that offense. You know, there's a temptation to view McCaffrey as kind of the cherry on top or that extra bit of luxury that Kyle Shanahan has at his disposal. But he is fundamental to the way that thing operates. And without him there, it just wasn't quite the same.
No, and it was never going to be. I mean, I think we had touched on it in the past weeks, Connor. To me, Christian McCaffrey is the key player there. It's funny, on the QB rankings, there was a huge debate before this game. Stephen Ruiz does QB rankings for The Ringer. There was a number of Niners fans who were really onto him. He had Brock Purdy ranked at 22. Touched on this in the Instant Reaction pod on Sunday. You know, you could make an argument 22 maybe was too low, but ultimately, you know, Niners fans, some of them were calling top 5, top 10. You saw what happened when Christian McCaffrey went out. Now, is Brock Purdy a bad QB? No, he still got them down ultimately, and it was a missed field goal, but they didn't look the same. And you saw the pressure that the Browns were able to get. And they lost a number. Debo went out. Trent Williams went out. But Christian McCaffrey, in a season, and we're going to, I think, get into this around defenses, in a season where defenses have been on top, Christian McCaffrey has been the difference maker. And since he went to San Francisco, their offense looks completely different. Right. Last year, they kind of stuttered at the beginning. They make the big trade and they have looked fantastic since then. Does it change how I feel about the Niners? No, I always felt that Niners had the best starters in the league. But my concern for the Niners was always around if there were injuries, because their starters are so good. It's nigh on impossible to have backups like that. And when you lose somebody like McCaffrey, there isn't anybody else like him in the league. Perhaps Bijan, but Bijan is only still finding his feet. So it doesn't change. I think they were up against a fantastic defense. Jim Schwartz, we probably didn't take into account how good his record is against Kyle Shanahan. I think that's a part we probably missed.
Colin, you'll enjoy this now in particular, Brian. I'm hoping we can take you along on this trip. But all I could think about was that Mel Brooks Spaceballs movie, you know, the Star Wars spoof. My Schwartz is bigger than yours.
Yes, I think that's a perfect summation.
Brian, talk to us about Brock, because, you know, and we're going to get to it when we talk up some of the defenses that have been dominating this season. Like all quarterbacks, once you finally get to him, he's human. And, you know, finally we saw some of the veneer come off after this incredible run he's had. And the step forward, to be fair to him, he's taken this season even beyond where he was last year.
We said, I think it was last week's review show, in which there's been a number of games in which teams have gradually started to get to him. The offensive line has succumbed to certain teams getting to him, and kind of close shave scenarios where he's just about managed to get the ball away, and there's been various teams that had opportunity to have picks and just hasn't materialized. But what we saw on Sunday, obviously, was the Browns find a way to finally intercept him. I think he had 82 yards in the region of that in terms of passing yards. It was the lowest count since he went in. But Colin was right. I mean, you've got weapons. We've spoken so many times about the weapons they have on offense, and it complements the quarterback who's essentially going in and doing exactly what Shanahan wants. But when you take those players out, and he has to be a little bit, I suppose, overzealous with the ball in terms of trying to get down the field to other players, it can be difficult. The Browns in particular, like we're talking about the defense, like the Browns for me are arguably right now the best defense in this league. They've only given up 1,002 yards passing, you know, against them, and that's you're going back to 1970, 71, I believe, is the last time we've seen something so low after 5 games. I said at the start of the season, I thought the Browns defense would march this team to the playoffs, and I'm still feeling that's very justified in terms of what I thought. But yeah, I think it's ultimately down to these two players and how quickly they're going to come back. Because we're saying like no matter how good the team is, no matter how successful, and we've seen it last year with the Eagles and certain players, those players need to play for this team to continue to trend and be successful. And it'd be interesting to see what they do and how they react and what they do, in particular in the run game, because they have got guys in the background, but not at the level of McCaffrey.
I mean, one thing that I'm not worried about the Niners. Frankly, of course, they're going to continue to be the team they are, and one of the teams to beat in the NFC, if not the entire league. But and maybe this is my Bears fandom, just with that little worry at the back of my head. You do not want to be going into the playoffs with a kicker that you can't trust. And Bears fans have been there with Cody Parkey and the double doink, a guy that was looking shaky through the season. Unfortunately, Jake Moody, and they drafted him quite high. They expended a decent amount of draft capital to get this guy, and the NFL stands for not for long for a reason. Like, it hasn't looked good for him so far, and that would be one thing that would be hanging over me. You want a guy who can be nails for 41 yards. Come on. Like, you just got to have that every single time. That should have been a win for the 49ers, regardless of how well the Browns have played, and they didn't quite get it. But look, let's move on to the Eagles column. Again, like the Niners, we saw them contained, and we saw Jalen Hurts look a little bit more human. Forced into some costly turnovers. We'll get to the Jet side of the coin and how well they played and what they've been able to do defensively, but it didn't quite click for the Eagles, and they paid the price.
Yeah, very surprising game for Jalen Hurts, because he's usually very careful with the football, and they started off really well, and they initially seemed to be doing quite well even after losing Lane Johnson. But the passing game has struggled, and then you saw it really fall apart. I mean, and I would argue that was probably Hurts's worst game potentially since he came in terms of just his own misreads, his own inability to kind of do what he needed to do to put his team in a position to win. Now, look, he fronted up afterwards, and I think the Eagles did. You heard Smith say, is there anything you can learn from it? And he said, learn? I just need to catch the damn ball. You'd like to hear more kind of players put their hand up at times and say, yeah, I just need to do better. But look, the passing game hasn't got going. I talked to people, I suppose, during the off season. There was a lot of optimism, but it's a little, perhaps a bit. I worried about this. My concern, could it be like the Bills last year, where Dable moves on and the relationship with Ken Dorsey and Josh Allen, I don't think has been the same, and I think you're seeing that even more so with Shane Steichen having moved on and Brian Johnson having come in there to that job. I think that is a huge issue. I think I keep going back to it. Shane Steichen is gifted. His feel for how to call the right plays at the right time. The Eagles are really, really missing that. So, yeah, you would have to be a little bit worried. They've brought Julio in. He's going to be on the practice squad. I think they recognize themselves. They probably need to do something. They're in for a really tough stretch games. I didn't have them going back to the Super Bowl because of the tough stretch games and because, losing somebody like Lane Johnson, he's almost irreplaceable, and they're finding that out. Now, look, do I think they're making the playoffs? Absolutely, but I think it's very difficult to maintain the level they were at last year.
And Brian, that is a point, isn't it? Like, we talk about the Eagles' depth that they have in both their lines and how strong they are in the trenches. It's become such a cliche when you talk about the Eagles, but nobody can sustain the loss of a player of the caliber of Lane Johnson, and that showed on Sunday.
Very much so in the second half. I mean, like, they didn't score in the second half. And I know a large part of that wouldn't be of benefit to the Jets defense in particular. But yeah, Lane Johnson, like, this is the thing when you bring players like Kelsey, and obviously Lane Johnson wasn't planning to retire, but they're the cogs in the wheel, and the guys are kind of float under the radar. But like we spoke time and time again, if you don't have a strong offensive line in front of you, 9 times out of 10, it doesn't really matter who you have back there playing quarterback. And you saw it gradually as the game went on. They wore that offensive line down, and they got to it. And it's the reality of the situation. You've got these marquee players on the offensive line. Once you step into beyond that, are you going to get the same production? I'm not entirely sure you would. And that's just in general across the league. We've seen that with numerous teams this year have had injuries in the offensive line. You just can't seem to patch it together. There's no cohesion at times with players, but that was a difficult one for the Jets. Bearing in mind how well difficult one for the Eagles. Bearing in mind how well the Jets defense played over the course of the game.
Well, let's talk about defenses then, Colin and Brian, because Colin, in particular, we've seen what the Jets and Browns did over the weekend, but we've seen teams like the Steelers, the Bengals, all getting serious help from their defenses, even when their offenses either haven't been purring, as in the case of the Bengals, no pun intended, or virtually non-existent, as in the case of the Steelers, who, as we pointed out, infamously managed to win a game with -4 yards in the fourth quarter in one game, and somehow finagle a victory against the Ravens last weekend, when they could do virtually nothing on the offensive side of the ball, thanks to their special teams and to that dominating defense that they have. Why is it that defenses seem to be ahead of the offense this season in particular? Because everything, as you know, we've talked about at length on the show before, is tilted in favor of the offensive wonderkins, but it's not working out that way so far this season. You expect it in week 1, week 2, week 3. By week 6, you expect the OCs to be clicking into gear, everything to be firing, and defenses to be on the back foot. That's not happening.
Oh, not at all. It is very much the defense is on top this season, and you're right, Connor. The way in which the pundits and all of us talked about this was, players don't play as frequently in the off season now, and they're just finding their feet, and it will click into place. Could it yet? Yeah, absolutely. But to me, I think there are a number of different factors to it. The league over the last few years, everyone got obsessed with the Vic Fangio system, right? And the kind of bend, don't break. And you saw, say, Sean McVay went out and got Brandon Staley as his DC because he was fed up of the fact that Fangio's defense seemed to cause the Rams all sorts of trouble. But what I think we are seeing this year is a further evolution. The issue with that was it was always bend, don't break, and it lacked aggression. Now, last year I think you begin to see the changes. Ejivo Evero with the Broncos had them more aggressive in the front, and that when you look at the Jets, when you look at the Browns at the weekend, the way they were able to get after the quarterback, right? Think about how good Huff was for the Jets. I mean, he caused the Eagles all sorts of issues. He was fantastic. And equally for the Browns, I mean, what you need to do is you need to be able to get pressure with 4, right? And that allows you on the back end. But what we're seeing is the aggression up front, and then a whole lot of misdirection and miscommunication at the back. Okay, so they're giving these false looks. QBs think, oh, it's cover 2 or it's cover 3. And what you're beginning to see now is defenses doing different things on two sides of the field. So on one side of the field, they might be playing cover 2, but on the other side of the field, they're playing cover 1. And that, again, in the NFL, you have roughly 3 seconds to throw the ball. So when you are seeing new looks, and as a QB, you are having to diagnose and react to it, you don't have time. You can't process it quickly enough. Now, look, there will be a response to this, and we will see how it will go. And I think Brian is probably going to delve into it a little bit. We were chatting about this earlier, and it's something that's come up. The red zone issues in particular have been enormous for teams this year.
And that's something that we saw again in those 2 big losses over the weekend for the Niners and the Eagles, Brian, where moving the ball smoothly up and down the field gets the red zone, and then suddenly it's not happening. They're kicking field goals, or they're getting stoned, as we saw with both of these previously high-powered offenses, and it's happened across the league with others. We've seen the Bengals sputter on the offensive side of the ball, although Lou Anarumo has kept them solvent on the other side of the ledger.
Yeah, I picked out 4 games in particular over the course of the weekend. 8 teams, 31 trips to the red zone over those 4 games. Only 5 touchdowns materialized. It's very much for some defenses. Colin's right in terms of, the nature of how teams are matching up, but there's also this kind of bend don't break scenario with teams as well. We see a team, quickly go down the field or methodically go down the field throughout the course of a particular drive, and yet when they get into the red zone, stalls. Same on Monday Night Football. There was a lot of, drives for the Cowboys in particular to get into the red zone, and it all stalls, and similar enough for the Chargers. It's an interesting dynamic because we haven't seen a lot of that previously. I know there's teams in particular who always seem to have difficulty when they get into red zones. I don't know whether it's a playbook scenario or whether just they get too conservative, but this seems to be very evident, and it's week in, week out right now. It's like years ago, you watch NFL, a team gets into the red zone, you're thinking, oh, here we go, it's a touchdown. But right now, it feels like it gets into this area and it's so condensed, and there's so many people, in the secondary, matching up in the end zone. And it's just so difficult unless you have a really productive run game. And even that, with that at the moment, that doesn't seem to be working.
Colin, I wonder, is there another factor in play here? And, you mentioned processing and you mentioned quarterbacks. We've talked for years about the college system not necessarily producing enough NFL-ready quarterbacks, and we see the travails of even some of the highly touted prospects and how difficult it is for them to adjust. Honourable exception for the likes of maybe CJ Stroud this year. Meanwhile, we're seeing cornerbacks coming out of college, the Sauce Gardners, the Devin Witherspoons, the Christian Gonzalez. We're seeing D linemen come out like Jalen Carter, Will Anderson Jr., ready to rock and slotting straight in. Georgia seems to have them on off a production line, and it seems like the defenses just are getting up to speed quicker. They're getting plug and play defenders straight out of college, and it's not necessarily happening to the same degree on the other side of the ball.
No, and I think some of that comes. I think the level of the talent and the defenses. It's when you consider, right? I was trying to look at this. So 10 of the 15 NFL games this week, right, from Thursday right through to last night, were one-score games. A number of them came down to the last play of the game. 14 of the 57 college games, 14 of 57 were one-score games. So as a QB, you have a lot more time in college, and there is, I suppose, time. You've more time with your teammates as well, in which to scheme, to plan, and to diagnose. So I think it's two kind of separate things. I think the talent that we're seeing on the defense, like when you're talking about Surtain and you're talking about Gonzalez, Witherspoon, Tariq Woolen, the concepts are beginning to come across from college, and those guys have the talent to back it up. But for QBs, they're playing a similar sort of game in the NFL. For QBs, it's different. You go from having 4 seconds or 4.5 seconds to throw to 3 seconds. That's an enormous difference. And the windows just aren't the same. And everybody is playing for a contract. There are no down weeks in any way, shape, or form. And it is difficult. So you've seen guys who in college have had success. They come into the league. I mean, Desmond Ridder is an example of that. Like Arthur Smith, spent all off season, and he was it. He was who they were building around. And Arthur Smith looked like he was ready to tear his hair out at the weekend. So it is interesting to see. I am wondering what the wrinkle, because remember, for more than a decade now, the NFL has done everything possible to make it a more offensive friendly game. It is why a Zach Wilson, why even a Desmond Ridder will have better stats than a Jim Kelly, a John Elway, and guys, legends of the past. It's just how the league made it. And that's interesting. There's always a response to the response, though.
Honourable exception, maybe, Brian, for the Dolphins, we should say, who were 5 of 5 on red zone trips.
Yeah, that's a consistent piece. This season, I know they're playing the Panthers on Sunday, and people argue the Panthers' defense is not very strong. Of course, you may go 5 or 5 in the red zone, but it's a constant team with the Dolphins every time they get into the red zone. Really productive against the Giants. We saw obviously what they did against the Broncos, and we're not to look too far ahead, but they're playing the Eagles next Sunday on Sunday Night Football. That's going to be a huge game, and it'd be interesting to see if how the Eagles' defense slows that offense down, and in particular if they get into the red zone. But very intriguing game to look forward to.
Before we wrap our first segment, though, Brian, let's not move on without giving praise where it's due to both the Jets and the Browns, who both showed up in a big way on Sunday and now find themselves collectively at 3-3 in seasons that for both teams for different reasons looked rocky, both playing with their second string QBs and finding a way to get it done.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking back to when we did that kind of over, too far ahead or way too early selections of the Jets, and we actually combed through their schedule before they reached the bye week, and here they are going into their bye week, and they're 3-3, and I think some of us had them at 2-4. That was with Aaron Rodgers. So for them to be 3-3, where they are, like they should take a step away at the moment, take a sigh of relief, because they're well within contention certainly for a wild card spot. But it is very much on their defense, in particular. Last year they had 16 interceptions throughout the course of the entirety of the season, where they're already at 13 after the first quarter of the season, shall we say. They were 29th in turnovers last year defensively, and here they are now up the top 5. They've completely turned that part of the team around. And bear in mind, they were without 2 cornerbacks, and they obviously touched on the Sauce Gardner not playing, and other various different players to put up that level of performance. As I said, the Eagles didn't score in the second half whatsoever. Colum's right, there was some poor play, but they held DeAndre Swift to 18 yards, and like he's been really one of the bigger bright spots for the Eagles this season. Bear in mind, he came in from the Lions in that kind of off-season trade, and they led Sanders to go to the Panthers. They slowed him down. It was a significant performance. The Browns, in particular, defensive-wise, look, I wasn't surprised. It doesn't come to surprise me how well they're playing. I felt it was coming. Jim Schwartz is a great defensive coordinator, but ultimately it's going to come down to how well the offense plays in the long run, because they had 44% in terms of production on offense on Sunday. That's not sustainable. And it's the same to Jets. Like Zach Wilson is fine, shall we say, at the moment, but he's always just one game away from a complete meltdown. So it'll be interesting to see. But the bye week probably a nice time for the Jets.
Welcome to the second segment of our Tuesday Talking Points. We're recapping week 6. And Colin, I wanted to throw something out there because we spent a good chunk of time last week talking about the Eagles and the Niners before putting the Irish NFL show jinx on them when they both went down over the weekend. Have we slightly slept on the Detroit Lions here? Because they've been going away relatively quietly, taking care of even some of the bigger names in their schedule. Obviously announced their presence with a statement win over the Chiefs in week 1. And that's pretty much been the pattern of how they've played since. They're running away with the North.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of us picked them to win the North, but I think because of the Dolphins and the Niners in particular, the Lions have slightly flown under the radar. I think perhaps the fact that they did have that loss to the Seahawks in some ways maybe helped them to continue, or if they were unbeaten, they probably would have had, more of a focus. But yeah, you have to admire, like, again, the way in which they've gone about their business. And Dan Campbell and the front office there have a plan. They, I certainly doubted their draft strategy this year. They are proving that they got it right. They knew what they wanted. They knew the characters they wanted to bring in. They knew what their roster needed. And I was listening, I think it was to Kevin Clark on The Ringer, and he was talking about Chuck Noll, the legendary Steelers coach, and about toughness and the idea of of toughness and what makes a player tough. And it's not the gruff presentation, it's not the tackles. What Chuck Noll said, what's true toughness is going out and doing your job on the practice field and on the playing field, week in, week out. And that's what the Lions are doing. They are performing magnificently on both sides of the ball. Jared Goff has been really probably playing the best football of his career, and he is continuing to develop. And this is a guy who, around about this time last year, Dan Campbell called him out. Right. He said, we need more from our QB. He's the leader. He's got the experience. And Goff didn't sulk, didn't go to the media, didn't say, my head coach is being too hard on me. He went to work, and you saw how they finished out the second half of last season. And look, I think, we can say that barring injuries, barring an absolute collapse of epic proportions in the remainder of the season, they're going to get to the dance. Can they win 4 games? Unlikely, you would think, but stranger things have happened.
Brian, one of the things I like about how they've gone about their business is, we've seen other teams flatter to deceive. We've seen teams put up a big performance one week like the Dolphins and then go out and lose the following week, or like the 49ers last weekend, off the back of that mauling of the Cowboys going down against the Browns. The Lions, as Colin pointed out, they did drop that one to the Seahawks, but they're right in it. It's a 1-score game. They show up against the teams that are the most combative and the most competitive, and they take care of business against the teams that they're supposed to beat. They doubled up the Panthers at the weekend. No mess, no fuss.
Yeah, but it's a team. It's the same team tonight. It's defense. It's defense for me with this team, and that's probably not what everybody thought this team would be. They thought it'd be a really expansive offense. I said at the start of the season, I thought they'd be in so many high-scoring games, and they come out the wrong end of some of them. And we saw that in week 2 when they lost to the Seahawks. But since then, like they put a beat down on the Falcons defensively when the Falcons went in, haven't had that strong start to the season. And we saw again on Sunday in Tampa, Baker Mayfield struggled to get the ball down the field. He was under pressure consistently throughout the course of the game. You could see in year 2 Hutchinson really developing into the player that they thought he was when they drafted him so high the year before. And it just all seems to be going well. They brought in some nice experienced players defensively as well. It all seems to be fitting together. And I think another bright spot for them right now, because it just comes at a nice time, is the return of Jamison Williams from the suspension for obviously the gambling, exploits, which he was pulled up on, and obviously he went with the 5-game. I think he appealed the ban and he got it reduced, but he has that big touchdown on Sunday, and I think he was a player that they moved up. Colin was talking about strategies around drafts. Well, let's bear in mind how big the Lions went to get up to 12 last year to get him, and now they're going to see probably the benefits of him coming in, being really fresh at this stage of the season, having come off the ban. So it just seems to be all pointing in the right direction from big games this weekend against the Ravens.
Because they're not exactly littered with star names either, Colin. It seems to be that culture is king there, and it also seems, to coin the line from the Robert Altman film, The Player, it's no stars, just talent.
Yeah, they have an identity, and I think that's hugely important. They know what they're about. They know what is expected of them, and they probably have a little bit of a chip on their shoulder after years and years in the wilderness, and that is that's a good thing. And what Dan Campbell has cultivated is really, really impressive. And you would have to say, we wondered when the OC stayed around. Sometimes it can happen, right? That you make a decision not to take a job and it doesn't work out. Brian might not like this, but Kafka made the decision, to ultimately to stay in New York. I think he might look back on that at the end of this season potentially and say, I probably should have gone. I don't think it's going to be the same situation in Detroit. And that's not picking on Kafka. There's loads of those, right? Sometimes, there's any number of factors that go into why one season goes well and another season doesn't. And it's not always on, one particular coordinator. But I will say that he stayed around because he was excited about what this team could do. And you can see why he ultimately decided to do that. He is going to get a head coaching job. And I think there will be quite the clamor for his services at the end of this season.
No, indeed. We look forward to welcoming him to Chicago at the start of the next season. Lions 5-1, sitting pretty. We have a bunch of teams, so 6 in all, 3 in each conference, nicely split, who are at 3-3. The 500 teams after week 6. Let's take a closer look at them and maybe look at who's primed to make a run from here and who we think might potentially be slipping back, might be lucky to be just keeping their heads above water at the moment. Let's start with the Bengals. Another difficult win for them, but they're finding different ways. And Brian, we spoke about this when they beat the Rams. It's someone else and it's some other part of the team steps up every week, and they've kind of carried Joe Burrow, getting him through the more chronic phase of the injury, if you like. He certainly looks to be moving a lot better, but that offense still isn't at anywhere near the level that you'd expect it to be, given the parts that they have. The sum hasn't been anywhere near what you would expect it to be.
Yeah, and turnovers again, critical on Sunday. Turnovers by both teams in that game, in particular, again in the red zone. Yeah, they're starting, but you could argue there's two sides of the coin here. You're starting at 3-3, and we've seen this team in the past kind of get things on the right track in the second half of the season and ultimately make the playoffs. And they're probably fortunate right now that they're in a division where they're all essentially beating up on each other. I think all teams are have a reasonably strong record. I know the Ravens are a game ahead of not having their bye week, but they don't strike me as a team similar to what we've seen in the past 2 years. I just think it seems a bit flat. It doesn't seem to be. Jamar Chase isn't at the level. T. Higgins has been injured. Tyler Boyd isn't playing at the same level, which we saw last year. Defensively, again, got them out of a hole on Sunday. And look, we're having the conversation tonight how the defensive teams can lead you to the playoffs and maybe beyond that. But I don't think that's long sustainable for the Bengals, because I just don't think they have enough weapons defensively to carry this team throughout the course of the season, as opposed to other teams that have really strong defense. They're 3-3. But right now, I wouldn't be. If I was a Bengals fan, I wouldn't be really comfortable with the situation in which they're in.
Colm, the Raiders, as Brian pointed out last week, if they got over the Patriots and the student became the master, as Josh McDaniels, in fairness to him, did over the weekend, they've gone to 500, despite what has widely been perceived to have been a disastrous start to the season. They're still in the mix. Are they going to stay there?
Yeah, it's a funny one because like there were moments in that game where they looked really good, and there were moments where it seemed that the Patriots were actually going to find a way to win it. I mean, the Raiders could, right? I can't explain it because what they're doing, you can't say anything is particularly working really well, other than they're finding ways to win, and that is impressive in and of itself. But they face a Bears team next, who, let's face it, they should be capable of winning that game. They then have the Lions, who we've just discussed. They then have the Giants, and then they face obviously a Jets team. So it'll be interesting to see which Giants team kind of shows up. And then they have the Dolphins and the Chiefs. So they have some really tough games coming up. And then it'll be interesting to see kind of, they have the Vikings, Chargers, Colts and Broncos as part of their 4 of their last 5. So it'll be, when we get to December, it will be very interesting to see where they stand, because when you look at those last 5 games, if they're there or thereabouts, they could, you never know. I thought they would be worse, and there have been times where they have looked inept, and yet there have been other times they have been very, very impressive. And that game, it was the most Patriots game, with Bill Belichick, with Josh McDaniel, Jimmy Garoppolo, Brian Hoyer. It was quite something, but ultimately they're the ones who got the win.
Brian, the Colts, we mentioned what the absence of Shane Steichen might have meant to the Eagles so far this season. The Eagles lost very much the Colts game. They still have Gardner Minshew playing in relief of Anthony Richardson. A tougher time for him over the weekend, and he's played well the last couple of weeks, but tougher time for him over the weekend. But they're still at 3-3, and they're well in contention, particularly in that milquetoast looking AFC South.
Yeah, I guess they are, bearing in mind what we saw on Sunday, and at Tottenham with Ryan Tannehill going down. It looks like now he's going to be out for the foreseeable. You'd be interested to see where the Titans go from there. But the Colts kind of strike me as a team that they're going to flourish in some games, and then the other games they're going to get beaten convincingly. And that was the case on Sunday against the Jags. It's like Colts fans, I'd imagine, will be looking at this kind of going, our expectation levels going into the season, where at a certain stage, and now all of a sudden as we move on, you start kind of turning an eye to potentially winning a division or making the playoffs. But I think over the course of the season, to see this team competitive and winning games ultimately is what a Colts fan will want after the last year in particular. They don't strike me as a team in the long term. I think gradually over the course of the next 4 to 5 weeks, they might drop off. I could be surprised, but we did have that conversation on Sunday, Connor, where we were talking about the Gardner Minshew piece, and then obviously we were watching it on the way home. There was some needless interceptions as well, and we were saying that's why this isn't sustainable, because he's the kind of quarterback, and we've seen it many times like Andy Dalton, like where they come in, play really well for a number of games, they win, and teams and their fans kind of get this, notion that this guy is the long-term answer or potentially the season answer, and it doesn't materialize. That's my concern with Gardner Minshew. He'll give you 2 or 3 really strong games, and then he tails off again. And the games in which he tails off, they get very comprehensively beaten, which we saw on Sunday.
Texans, on the other hand, Colin, won on Sunday, which put them at 3-3 alongside the Colts in the AFC South. They've been spicy. D'Amico Ryan's doing a really good job there, just like Shane Steichen in Indy, and it's not looking too bad for them either.
No, I think they are the team that I think could potentially make a run, because I think they have a real QB who has kind of taken to a duck to water, right? There have been plenty of QBs around the league who are really struggling. I think the next one up, who we're going to discuss here, is the Commanders. I'll let Brian delve properly into that, but just to compare Stroud to Sam Howell. Sam Howell is currently on pace for 96 sacks. 96. That would be 20 more than David Carr. And that season broke David Carr. Spiritually, physically, mentally, emotionally. I don't know. Sam Howell seems to be maybe more robust. But Stroud has been just so impressive. When you look at it, they've got a good group of receivers there. The defense has come together much quicker than maybe I expected it to. And you look at the schedule, they got the Panthers next. Then they've got the Bucks, Bengals, Cards. Yes, there's some tough games. There are no easy games. We can't, that's the cliche that rings true. But you'd have to say that kind of between now and, when they face the Jets on the 10th of December, they're all games that can be in. I think there'll be a really tough game against the Bengals and the Jags. But I think this Texans team are capable of being spicy. Will they get there? I don't think that's certain, but I do think they might well end up, being a fly in the ointment for some playoff hopeful teams.
Brian, what about the Commanders then? As Colin mentioned, very volatile season for them. They opened up with 2 wins on the bounce, which surprised a lot of people, then seemed to revert to form, losing 3 on the spin. But having been beaten badly by the Bears, which is not a phrase we get to use often on the show, in regards to any team, they came back strongly. There's plenty of character there, but can Sam Howell lead them to something approaching a successful season and go on a run here?
I thought Colin should have had this one. He was the one that, he bailed on the Commanders. He had them in his selections for the playoffs, and ultimately then he bailed in the very last minute when it was time to give those final cards in. They just strike me as a team right now that they're up. There's so many up and downs. We're talking about the Colts in terms of how they've, had their 3-3, but they're under a new head coach. They're clearly playing for Rivera, and we question whether that would be the case coming into the season. There was a lot of conversations around the new owners, and this could be his last year as head coach. But you're going to get the sense they are very much in unison with one another within the squad. And I think Eric Bieniemy, we're talking about Sam, Hell, and the difficulties having in terms of the sacks and the offensive line struggling, but he's still coming in the week after a difficult game against the Bears, albeit 10 days, and maybe they had the additional time to correct the woes of that particular Thursday night game. But to come out last Sunday and navigate a victory, bearing in mind the pressure he would have been under to kind of rebound was really kind of great to see, and and also defensively. They brought some nice players this year. I know Forbes, the cornerback, had a bit of a struggle over the past few days. Probably he went further up the board, and other cornerbacks who seem to be kind of hitting the ground running quicker than he is. But there was some timely interceptions and big stops within the game for defensively. So right now they seem to be getting good play on both sides of the ball. They've got the Giants this weekend. It's a kind of a must win for both sides, because if the Commanders want to reach that level similar to the Giants last year in terms of just being thereabouts to make the playoffs, they got to win this game, and for the Giants obviously to save our season type of game. It'd be interesting one to see how they go. And the problem with the Commanders right now is 1 week they look good, and you can say, right, okay, I can see the narrative has to win the following weekend, and then they go and do a performance against the Bears, which we saw recently, and then we've seen that already with other games as well.
The Rams, column, if there's one thing that's really noticeable about them to me, is that Sean McVay really looks like he's having fun. Like, he looks like he's enjoying himself more than he did when they went and won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, he really does. And again, I think these younger players who are come in, who are really hungry, who clearly want to be coached. I think Sean McVay is a guy who enjoys coaching. He enjoys teaching players. He enjoys coming up with new concepts, with new schemes, and he has the veteran players there in Cooper Cup, in Stafford, in Aaron Donald, who he can lean on. But they have been mightily impressive, and I suppose last year was the real down year, but we are seeing what he has been able to do. Now, certainly the kind of second half of the schedule, there are plenty of tough games in this. There's some winnable ones too, but they won't shy away from the challenge. And in an NFC, I don't think they are going to be challenging the Niners for the division. But is it possible that all of a sudden we see 3 teams come out of the NFC West? I think, yeah, it's certainly possible, but it's a rocky road, right? They've got the Browns that they're going to have to face, and they obviously have another game against the Niners where they're going to have to go on the road. They got the Ravens in there as well. But they have the vets. Cooper Kupp is back, and he seems to be enjoying himself as well. And Sean McVay's having fun. The Rams are a really fun team to watch.
A coach that doesn't necessarily look like he's having a lot of fun, Brian, is Arthur Smith. Like, it's a great clip that's gone around of him doing this after Desmond Ridder throws a particularly bad interception. And in fairness to Smith, he's made his bed there and he kind of has to lie in it. But the Falcons are around 500. It feels like the Falcons have been around 500 for the last 4 or 5 years. They never seem to make much of a break the other side of it, and they never seem to slip too far below it. Can they change the trend this season?
Not if they continue with Ritter in the long term, I don't believe. I know Shane, who was on the show last week, made a great point. He was unbeaten in his NFL career at home, and he was unbeaten in his college career at home. I think he put the mockers on him because he goes and has a stinker on Sunday with a 3 interception. Like Arthur Smith, for me, on Sunday, he very much looked like a head coach that was kind of going, like, this is not sustainable. How can I put up with this? Yeah, we saw it in London. You know, they were really poor in the first half. He had interceptions. He led them back slightly in the second half, and there was an opportunity to kind of get really back in the game late on. Couldn't get it over the line, and it just strikes me as someone right now. Arthur Smith is looking to go, if only I had a better quarterback, I could really propel this team, because they've got so many talented players offensively. We saw Kyle Pitts with a touchdown at the weekend, who's been, floating under the radar. Bear in mind the scrutiny and the enormity when he came into the league, and they've got other great players there. But Ritter, for me, is a big worrying concern for them and for Falcons fans.
Colin, we final team that's at 3-3, and there were 8 actually, not 6. I miscounted, so apologies for that earlier. But I had a bit of a Nathaniel Hackett there. I couldn't manage the numbers. And the Saints have a little bit of pretty much all of the trends we've been talking about on the talking points. Defense ahead of their offense, piling up yards, but don't have the red zone efficiency. You're not quite sure whether the quarterback play is at the level that it should be at. Yes, they're 3-3, and the NFC South is a competitive division, but it's competitive in its weakness, and they're very much in the mix.
They are, but I suppose I would point to the teams that ultimately they got the wins against: the Titans, the Panthers, and the Patriots. Not exactly murderer's row, is it? Like the Panthers might end up giving the number 1 overall pick, and discuss this on the instant reaction pod. Like, if you're the Panthers and you're David Tepper, imagine you give the number 1 overall pick to the Bears, and you have to live with the fact that whoever the Bears take is going to be compared to Bryce Young for eternity.
I wouldn't worry about that, Colin, if I was David Tepper, because whoever the Bears take, they're going to ruin him anyway. Or Caleb Williams or Drake May, whoever loses that to us.
Very interesting to see, but they beat up on the Patriots, who just look, Bill Belichick looks absolutely shell shocked. He really does. And sorry, lads, but with all I know you love your teams, but I know they faced the Bears and the Giants the rest of the way, and they've got the Panthers again, but they also have the Lions in there, the Rams in there. It's a strange one, like, 'cause, there are absolutely winnable games, and the South is, nobody. It's again, right? We're back to this. It was like this last year. Nobody seemed to want to win it. If they can get going, certainly the defense seems to be playing a little bit on memory at the moment, right? They're kind of, we can see flashes of who they once were. They aren't the juggernaut. Difficult game on Thursday night, you would have thought, against the Jags, but Trevor Lawrence might not play, so they might get lucky in that way. And then all of a sudden they're playing a Colts team. We hear that Anthony Richardson is, according to Jim Irsay, probably out for the season. I would imagine if you're the Colts head coach, you're probably not delighted that once again the owner is giving away exactly what's going on, but there you are. So I think the next two games are kind of critical, because after that they face the Bears and they face the Vikings. So yeah, they could be, realistically, they could end up winning all four of them, and they could be sitting kind of at 7-3, or equally they could lose. Well, sorry, Conor, they probably won't lose to the Bears, but they could lose the other three, and all of a sudden it looks very different going into the back end of the season. They are a real kind of Jekyll and Hyde team, more so than potentially anyone else that we've discussed on the list.
Colin, what sense, given the number of times that you've said the teams will lose to the Bears, you're still feeling sore about the fact that you picked them last weekend? Even I didn't pick them to beat the Vikings.
Conor, I'm going to make a quick point on the Saints. Like, Thursday, for me, is kind of like that marquee game. Like, they have to win that game, more so because we think back a years where the Saints, in the primetime games at home, a crowd rallying behind the team, and like, for people to take them serious. Colin was right. Like, they haven't beaten anybody of great significance this season, but for teams to take them seriously, winning the division, I would say they got to go win this game. And it does look like Trevor Lawrence is going to play, judging by the nature of the comments coming out this evening. But it stands out to me this week as a game that, if they really want to be moving in the right direction and be taken seriously within the NFC, this is the game they have to get over the line.
All right, this is segment 3 of our Tuesday Talking Points, where we're going through all of the main discussion topics from week 6 of the NFL season. And Colin, or Brian rather, we might jump to you on this one, since it involves your favorite Chargers. We need to talk about Justin Herbert, don't we? I mean, I saw a tweet from David Furones, the Miami Dolphins beat reporter who works for the Sun Sentinel, saying earlier today that he's seen a lot less talk about Justin Herbert missing open throws than if Tua did the same thing, and providing a couple of video clips to back up his argument. It's kind of a fair point. Herbert looked sensational in 1 or 2 games earlier this season, but he's quietly not looked great the rest of the way.
Dolphins fans are always going to have that narrative, whether they're a supporter or whether you're a media analyst, journalist, because of the nature of where they were drafted. Like, 4 and 5 in the same draft, and Dolphins fans have, over the course of the last couple of years, with the injuries to will always reflect on when we had Justin Herbert. Like, Herbert has been carrying this team for large parts, and now all of a sudden he's coming under scrutiny, particularly around one game, because the last game against the Raiders, he bailed them out with a 51-yard throw at the end to get over the line. But he did look off last night. I thought there was some throws that he looks like he was in discomfort for parts of it. I don't know whether the injury to the left arm, he certainly wasn't. Even when he gets out of pocket, there was times last night where he was hesitant, where normally he would look to run. And he's not a running type of quarterback for me. He's not your Mars or your Justin Fields, but he's still very powerful when he gets the wheels on. And last night he just looked a bit kind of tentative to go for that run, as if the injury was a concern for him, and some of the throws were off. But like, I did talk to Colin about it today. It's unfair because he doesn't really have a stellar bunch of receivers around him. Like, Mike Williams has gone injured. Keelan Allen's on the wrong end of his career. Hugo Palmer is up and down. Their tight end is hit and miss. He gets a touchdown last night. He doesn't do very much else for the game. So I think it's unfair to put the scrutiny on him in that game last night. And I don't have a lot to say on Brandon Staley for the change last night, because ultimately I don't think it was down to him either. Just thought they just came out on the wrong end of a game. But look, something famous came out of this game last night. I mean, that lady that was seen at the end celebrating the touchdown has been on Pat McAfee and all today. So, they have a start in waiting in terms of a new supporter.
Yeah, is it fair to criticize criticize Herbert Colin, or are we overweighting one or two games and one game in particular last night? I mean, even that final throw, he'd just been smashed by Micah Parsons, and he does seem to be banged up, as we saw again last season. Herbert's the kind of guy who tends to play down any physical discomfort. He's not going to moan about it. But we know last year he was severely compromised when people at times got on his case. But he comes to work every day and he puts in some shift.
Yeah, I'm going to stick up for Justin Herbert a little bit. I mean, I think the way in which the NFL means that we respond to, like, every game is almost, a referendum on QBs. And it was Tua for a while. Now it's Herbert. I've talked about it before. Like Brian, I don't rate the Chargers' weapons. Mike Williams, he's fine, but he's no more than fine. Brian points out Keenan Allen, I think Keenan Allen's a very good player, but he's on the wrong end of his career. I don't think they have a burner. They've never had a tight end. And Austin Eckler, everyone gets very excited about him. He's never broken 1,000 yards on the ground. So this is the issue for the Chargers and for Herbert. I also think ultimately he's had two very bad head coaches. Like Anthony Lynn, no, and Brandon Staley, no. So two guys who completely out of their depth. And what I would also point to, and look, we'll see. I think comparing the two players is kind of crazy, but to me, like in terms of Herbert, like maybe look at kind of Matthew Stafford, right? Because Matthew Stafford was with the Lions for a long time, and was compared to Matt Ryan. Right, Matt Ryan won an MVP, and at that point in their respective careers, how many people would have said, Matt Ryan is the better QB? Well, would you say that now, looking back on their careers? So I think we're way too quick to judge. Herbert has been in the league four seasons. We will see. I rate him. I've seen the flashes of it. I understand the potential, but he's playing, unfortunately for the Chargers and for their fans, it's like the footballing gods have, ultimately decided that the Chargers are a plaything who, they will find new ways to kind of laugh and mock at them over the course of the season. So yeah, like you look at it last night, you go, yeah, Justin Herbert had a poor game, but we're just a couple of weeks removed from when he threw 40 passes when he was 85%, and it was ridiculous. He's a wonderful player, but he does need more around him.
Right, so we're throwing that case out of court, and let's be honest, there's a lot of teams that would be more than happy to have Justin Herbert under center, particularly those teams that are relying on their backup QBs, Brian. A couple of backup quarterbacks are going to have to carry their teams for a while, and let's maybe throw the spotlight on some of them. We talked about Gardner Minshew a bit earlier. PJ Walker did a great job for the Browns at the weekend. And, we saw what he did in Carolina. Peak PJ Walker may not be anything like peak Justin Herbert, but right now it's enough for the Browns.
I wouldn't be convinced by that now, to be honest. I think you're going to be quiet showing there. He was 12 of 27 and he had a 44% strike rate on Sunday. He put himself in some holes and the defense carried him. The Browns from here are in a good position right now. They played the Colts.
He also hit Amari Cooper for a couple of great strikes to play the game open.
But with all due respect, there was two particular plays, that one and one to Ward, which I put more so on the wide running back and the wide receiver to come down with those particular passes. We saw him having difficulties for other teams, and I don't think it's sustainable for. If the Browns fans believe that he's going to be the long-term solution, I think there's other teams in better positions with backup quarterbacks who can get more wins. But it'd be interesting when Deshaun Watson comes back, because right now there seems to be a bit of an uneasiness around what's going on there, because it looked like against the Ravens he was due to play. It was only that late mid-afternoon he was pulled out, and the Browns seemed to be comfortable that they could play, and he openly said, "No, I don't feel right to play." And then they had their bye week. He hasn't played He hasn't played this weekend, so it'll be interesting to see if he is ready this weekend. For me, PJ Walker is not the answer long term for them if they want to continue winning. Ultimately, then it will be more pressure on the Browns defense to win games.
Zach Wilson, Colin, we've talked about him at length before, but just about doing enough to keep the Jets above water. Yes, relying heavily on the phenomenal defense that we've already talked about. But one of the talking points of the weekend was Aaron Rodgers crutchless, throwing the ball on the field, only a couple of weeks removed from that Achilles tendon. Aaron Rodgers is willing himself well and using whatever dark magic himself and Pat McAfee can conjure between the two of them to get him back playing. But every week and every clip of Rodgers that you see looking slightly fitter than you'd expect him to see perhaps at this stage of his rehab, it's just going to kindle that hope in New York that they can just stay between the ditches long enough to get him back, and then it takes off again. Is there any scenario, do you think, that Zach Wilson can steer the ship into port in time for Rodgers to jump on and attach the motor to the speedboat?
He is absolutely reliant on the defense. I mean, he was under 60% at the weekend. His passer rating was down from the previous week against the Broncos. So he's had a passer rating over 100 once thus far, weirdly against the Chiefs. But you know, it was funny. He came in and people were, apoplectic, and I get why. And then people were like, amongst the punditry class, that was like, oh no, look, he had a great game against the Chiefs. He's improving, and look, remember the pro day and remember the throws that he can make. And then ultimately that has fallen off again. I think they've decided they're going to run it back with him, that's how it's going to be. And I think ultimately it's about trying to put scaffolding in around Zach Wilson to limit the damage that he can do. It is the ultimate sort of kind of game manager, because the danger with Zach Wilson is that he thinks he is much better than he is. And there are a number of QBs. You need a little bit of that. You need self-belief. But Zach Wilson, Baker Mayfield, and Sam Howell now, to I think a degree, have a level of delusion where they think they're much better than they are. They think they can make these enormous throws, and they can't. But it is a shame for the Jets, right? Because you can see how good the rest of the roster is. And essentially what it has come down to is Garrett Wilson, again at the weekend, just ridiculous catches, like reaching behind the defender to take the ball, a ball he had no right or reason to get. I mean, he's bailing Zach Wilson out, and Breece Hall is fantastic as well. And they're doing that and missing a number of their O-line guys. That's an important piece to remember. But yeah, they're winning. I would say they're not even winning with Zach Wilson at the moment. They're winning in spite of Zach Wilson. And I think that makes them even more impressive.
You took the words out of my mouth. I was just about to say that we have the two categories, the guys that you win with and the guys that you win because of. But yeah, Zach Wilson is the poster child for the third category, which is the guy that you win in spite of.
Connor, can I just make a quick point on Aaron Rodgers? I was reflecting on the timelines, and going back to the Cam Akers injury a couple of years ago, which he injured, similar injury in July, and he came back that season. I think he played in the Super Bowl that year, but 6 months it took him. And people are suggesting Aaron Rodgers can beat 6 months. Now, if we're working off a timeline of a running back who's 14 years younger than the quarterback who's going to get hit on every play, 6 months from the start of September, that brings him up to February. So unless Zach Wilson's going to lead the Jets to the Super Bowl and he's going to step in, I can't see in any world where
I'd say you see Rodgers back on the crutches after the trade deadline passes, as long as he knows that there's no scenario in which Kirk Cousins or Ryan Tannehill are taking a job in New York. He'd be back with the boot on and the feet up on the poof at home, watching it on TV. There'd be no more Rodgers in the stadium slinging the ball around. But we shall see. One guy that we will see slinging the ball around, O'Brien, this weekend, and he had to fill in relief of an injured Justin Fields last weekend, is Tyson Bagent, undrafted free agent quarterback, which doesn't tend to be a pool into which many teams have to dip or fish. He showed up well in preseason games for the Bears, so he got his chance. He got moved up the depth chart, and now he's in in for the Bears and going to start a game at the weekend. So good for him, but maybe not necessarily good for the Bears.
Well, me and you were together at the time watching some of his play on Sunday. I could see your facial expression said it all for an Irish part of the fourth quarter in which we were playing. Look, it was difficult for him. He comes into a game, he never believes he's going to, 9 times out of 10, he's never going to be in that game with Justin Fields as quarterback. But unfortunately, with the injury, maybe having the week to prepare, knowing that you're going to be the starter on Sunday, we'll see a better performance. It's going to be an interesting one. So he'll go up against a 5th round pick in Aidan O'Connell on Sunday, potentially. Two rookie quarterbacks. I think we'll see probably a better performance. It was difficult for him to be thrown in the nature of the game, where the game was at that stage for him to step in. But ultimately, he still found a way to get them down. I don't know. It's yourself. It's difficult for these guys stepping in at times.
And he's in that tricky zone as well, where you see what one of the things that I give the Ravens great credit for is you have a backup quarterback who at least is similar and can play in a similar way, albeit not anywhere like the same level of Lamar Jackson. But Tyler Huntley at least can approximate Lamar Jackson or plays in a similar style. Taking over from a quarterback that's totally different from you is no joke. The offense is, I'm going to say it's set up for Justin Fields. That's an open question as to whether it is or not. In theory, it's set up for Justin Fields. Bagent obviously has a different skill set, and that's going to be tricky enough for him, but we shall see. Before we wrap, Colin, a couple of thoughts maybe on the overseas games. Been another successful London series. Germany next up, 2 games in Frankfurt this year. Last year's game, and we remember, Tom Brady being absolutely euphoric in the aftermath of the Bucks winning there about the German crowd. Everybody who went there that I've talked to couldn't say enough good things about Frankfurt. So that's it's pretty exciting to see that, and we know it looks like we're going to see Madrid on the cards as well next year. This thing really has momentum.
Yeah, absolutely. I think Americans were shocked by Germany. I think anyone on this side of the Atlantic knows what German football fans are like, knew that American football is huge in Germany and has been for years. So I don't think it was a surprise here, but it was a surprise there. I've no doubt that Germans will show out and it'll be fantastic. And look, this is going to continue to grow. When we had Henry Hudson on, I mean, that must be 2 years ago at this point, Brian, when he mentioned Madrid and he mentioned Brazil, and Peter O'Reilly came out just a few weeks ago and again kind of confirmed, oh yeah, we've had people on the ground there. They're going to happen. This is going to continue to grow. The 17th game, I think, gives them a lot of scope. I think you will see more games in more places. And it means then with the 17th game that fans back in the States probably aren't, missing out as much. But I mean, Roger Goodell talked about the experiment of having a team, stay over. If you are at any team, like let's say, and again, I don't see how it's the Jags because of what they're investing, but if you're a team, right, you're the Bills, you watch the Bills and you saw what the Jags did to a team who kind of came over and they look so slow and so sluggish. Imagine if they were, in situ for 3 or 4 weeks. I mean, they would be, no matter who they were, you'd have them as favorites for those. That's an interesting piece as well. And just, on the flag football, it's fantastic to see, right? I think it's been coming for a while. The NFL has put a lot of effort into it. Bringing Brett Gosper across, I think, always meant this was likely. He had done so much work in terms of rugby and the Olympics. Flag was already there. We know its growth in popularity. When you had the Super Bowl ad, that kind of was a real indication that, they were putting the foot down on this. But I think it's great for everyone. I think that is a sport that can grow and thrive. And you've got the finals of the flag leagues on in Ireland coming up. So that, I think, good news all around.
And Brian, when you experience, as we've all been fortunate enough to do those overseas games, and you think about the momentum building and the activation going on with the Steelers and potentially the Jags, and we'll see what the Jags plan for the Irish market. It's great for the NFL fan community here, which is growing all the time, which we hope to continue to grow, and to listen to this show and others and really get into the games. You can see the kindling now catching fire, and the flames are growing higher and higher.
Oh, absolutely. Like we were fortunate to go along to the Steelers press conference last May. I know you're there as well, Connor. And we spoke to Henry Watson on that particular day, and he addressed the fact that for quite a long time now, the NFL has been very much aware that the popularity of the sport in Ireland, and it was inevitable that the Steelers at some stage would tap into the Irish market. I think ultimately for all Irish fans here, the dream is to see a regular season game here. I know, like, obviously the NFL have their pecking order, shall we say, at the moment, bearing in mind the great work they've done in other countries. But again, I don't think it's against our realms possibility now that within 5 to 6 years we'd see a game being played in Croke Park, whether that's pre-season or regular season. But I mean, it just continues to thrive. Just one little anecdote. Just what disappointed me actually yesterday, listening to some of the news coming out of the States, in particular around the Buffalo Bills, and obviously I was taking a keen eye on that after having played the Giants Sunday. The American people were suggesting the Bills are having a double whammy, because not only were they slow in the first half last week, and they were putting that down to the jet lag situation. Well, they were slow for 3 quarters. They didn't score 1 point in the 3 quarters on Sunday. And they were putting that down to the adverse reaction, having to travel back from London, as to why they were so poor in that game. But yet the Jags were able to go out and put a stellar performance on the Colts. So I wasn't buying into that. But once I'm really excited.
Sorry, Brian. It does seem to be a mindset thing, doesn't it? I mean, I know we spoke to Joe Staley when we were in London at the weekend, and put out the video, and we've had some really good reaction to that. The San Francisco 49ers legendary lineman, and he was saying, he was bewildered at the idea that teams would come in at short notice. He said, we never saw this as a chore when I was playing. We saw it as a really exciting opportunity. We enjoyed coming to London. We enjoyed the overseas games. We viewed it as a bonding experience, and it helped us as a team. And it does seem that the teams that approach it in that way get the benefit of it. John Harbaugh had learned his example from that 44-7 pummeling that the Ravens got some years ago, that he said was the most embarrassing loss of his career. And they approached the game in a very different way over the weekend, and they got the dividend for it.
Yeah, that's just the fortunate thing. It's come back around full circle again, because I thought we'd moved on from this conversation around teams. Like, we've had several people on over the course of the last 45 years. I recall when we had Joe Shane on to join us, and we quizzed him around the fact that they were coming to London, and he didn't take the bye week the week after that. And he said from his experience working in the league, he'd been to obviously the UK with the Dolphins from his time there, and he said it's a longer commute back for us from Seattle after a road game than it is London, which is why we took the bye after Seattle as opposed to the week after. And the week after last year, which the Giants played in London, they beat the Ravens at home. So, like, there is, unfortunately, people are kind of slightly blindsided right now by the negative reports, which is a bit disappointing. But I think gradually, like, this isn't going away. Like, I've seen a report today, they're going to try, at some stage, I think they might have a game every week across Europe, and that ultimately will be that 17th game for each team. And over the course of the season, there'll be 17 weeks of games played across Europe. That sounds like a bit of a dream right now, but bearing in mind where we are now compared to where we were 10 years ago, is it against the realms of possibility? Probably not.
Well, certainly not one that you're going to hear us complaining about, that's for sure. That is our Week 6 Tuesday Talking Points. We'll be back with you very soon on the Irish NFL Show.